all the idolatry in your life will let you down. Do you hear me? Pastor Paul, you're going to have to prove that. Well, I'll try. I said to you last week that I would bring you some examples of idols in our lives, and I will do that. But right now we're going to go to the scriptures to look at some of the idols that have been plaguing us from the beginning of time. A book I'd like to introduce to you is by Timothy Keller called Counterfeit Gods. Starting next week, we're going to have some books, some select books that I've chosen in a little bookshelf that I bought from Costco in the back in the dining room there, and you'll be able to check them out, and this will be over there. And this is called Counterfeit Gods. And here he talks about a lot of different kinds of gods, and he draws on this particular story that we're looking at today to show us some gods with which we struggle. With a lot of us, all of us really struggle. Let's take a look. Now, back to Genesis chapter 29. Genesis chapter 29 is the story of a guy named Jacob. Jacob, he's just gotten kicked out of his home, went across the country to his relative's house, found a girl there that he finds particularly attractive. He is love at first sight. This is completely love at first sight, and her name is Rachel. As a matter of fact, the Bible tells us literally that Rachel had a nice figure. That's literally what it says, that she had a nice figure. And she stayed with Laban, her father, for about a month, and after that month, Laban said, "Why should you work for me for nothing? You shouldn't just live with me and then work for me. What should your wages be?" And Jacob, in this incredible expression of devotion and love, says, "I don't need any wages from you except your daughter. I want Rachel. I will work for you 7 years to get your daughter Rachel." So for 7 years, he slaves away without pay so that he can have Rachel, so that Rachel might be his wife. So 7 years have ended, and finally Jacob, he says to Laban, after they had that party, the celebration, the wedding night, and he's been drinking and all of this, he said, "Give me my wife, so that I can sleep with my wife. Give me my wife." Literally, this is what he says. So for 7 years, it has built up to this night. Laban sends his daughter in to Jacob. Jacob sleeps with Laban's daughter. And look at the way the text says it in the morning. It says it. Look at Genesis 29. Verse 21. Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening, took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. He went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. Look at these words. "And in the morning, behold, it was Leah." Okay. Here's the picture. So most of the men can relate. For Jacob, this love, this chemistry, physical attraction was a god. He felt that if he just had this girl, that he would be absolutely happy. So men make beauty, right? Getting beauty, their god. And in a way, women make being beauty their god, right? Okay. Evidence the amount of money we spent on makeup and the amount of time that men spend on seeking women or that woman. But how memorable was that night for which Jacob had labored for 7 years? Apparently, he didn't even know who he was sleeping with that night, right? He spent the night not knowing who he was with, and he woke up and the text says, "Behold, Leah, somebody else." Leah was Rachel's older, less pretty sister. Her eyes are weak. It could mean that her eyes are cross-eyed. There was something uncomely, unattractive about her. And he was really, really upset. But really, it really didn't matter to him ultimately. If you think about it, again, he didn't even know who he was with the night before. But Tim Keller brings it out. No matter what God you make of your life, whether it's sex, whether it's love, whether it's beauty, they let you down 110% of the time. And you wake up in the morning, it's always Leah. It's never Rachel. Do you hear what I'm saying? It's always Leah. Your gods will disappoint you 110% of the time. And what a story that brings that out so well. For us who've lived for pleasure, really, when you've gotten it, how long has your pleasures really lasted you? Overall, has it really added to your sense of happiness? When we live in America that has so many gods, so much of everything that the rest of the world seems to live for, why is depression just as high, it seems, or the sense of well-being just as high, just as low as anywhere else in the world? Why is that the case? Because gods, idols, disappoint. Because the Bible is right when it says that every other thing that you could possibly live for is a well or a cup that's broken, that can't hold any water. And if you forsake the fountain of living water, who is God himself, you will always go thirsty. Anything in this life that you might live for. All right, I said that I would give you some examples of other gods in life today. Here, let me show you a few from Leah's life. We read here that God saw that Leah was not loved by Jacob. God loved Leah. God gave himself for her, or God gave her her sons. And because of the sons, the woman confesses a few things. And one of the things is, God has had mercy on me, and God has given me a son. Or because I have borne my husband these sons, now my husband will love me. Okay, two idols I see here. One is the affection of her husband. She says, if I could just get the affection of my husband. I have this competitor that has a lot better advantages than me. She's a lot prettier than me. And so naturally, my husband's heart is more inclined toward her. If I could just get my husband's heart, if I could just take sole possession of my husband's heart, then I will truly be happy. This is the language of worship. This is the language of idolatry. How many of us have lived that way? How many single people are under the impression, if I could just get married, and if I could just have a husband, if I could just get me a wife, then I would be truly happy? Is that really the case? I remember I told you about some friends of mine who said, oh, I want Jesus to come, but I hope he comes after I get married. After I've had a family, That's the language of idolatry, people. If Jesus comes, what will it matter in the spectrum of eternity whether or not you were ever really married? And in light of who God is, as a single person, you have an opportunity, a usefulness for God that people who are married are at a disadvantage to give. So don't waste your singleness. Use it for the glory of God. Don't waste it looking for that relationship that's supposed to answer everything in your life. That's not the right way to go about it. That's not the answer. Your husband and your wife is never meant to bear that kind of weight from you. Only God can bear the weight of being God. Some of you have experienced many disappointments with relationships. Maybe you put too much expectation on your partner, one way or another, whether it's your friend or whether it's your family. Maybe it's the kind of expectation you should have only placed in God alone. Very worldly advice. This one old man said to a younger man, he had been married for many decades. The younger man was about to get divorced with his 5-year-old marriage. 5-year-old marriage, okay? 5-year-old marriage. And in that marriage, he's having a difficult time, comes to his senior and says, how is it that for so many years you and Diane have been married so happily? And he said, well, when we used to get married, when we got married when we were younger, we expected less and we got more. These guys these days seem to expect so much, so they end up getting a lot less. That's some good words of advice. But our hearts long, don't they? Our hearts long for full satisfaction. Our hearts long for the true love of a spouse. But that kind of longing, that kind of fulfillment is to be found in God alone. And Leah was putting that on Jacob. And no wonder there was strife in that family. Also, Leah, it seems, had children, had these babies, the son as a guide, right? I talked about these 5 little children in our in our church family, but those are very, very powerful idols in tiny packaging, right? They are. They scream at you if you don't fill their needs, right? And then you offer the sacrifice of milk and blankets and sacrifice of time to placate that deity. They're gods. They are. Pastor Paul, how dare you speak of my cute little adorable monster like that? How could you do that? Well, again, you're talking like a worshiper. If that baby was not an idol in your life, you wouldn't be so defensive. You would say, amen, amen. That is a temptation for idolatry in my life. And I have to lay that idol at the feet of King Jesus all the time. I remember, well, just the other day, I had dinner with one of you, and you were talking about your children, how the Lord spoke to your heart about your children, and you're worried about your children, and God says, whose child is so-and-so? Well, God, it's yours. Then why are you worried? You're right. You see, that's the right perspective. Do you understand? Of setting our children in a very safe place. And where is the safest place in the universe? It's in the embrace of God. Where you let your children go. Let your idols go. Remember, idols are usually good things. Things that are usually good in your life. And you lay them and leave them with the Lord. Especially, as I'm serving the ministry, I find these cases so much. Why do children, okay, it's said that a lot of people leave the church after they are able to do so. Right, when they're 20 or 25. Some of you are seeing this video on YouTube. It says, I hate religion, but I love God. Do you know what I'm talking about? I hate religion, but I love God. I wonder, especially in Korean society, maybe that religion aspect, and it's widely popular, and there is some truth in it, and I think there's a lot of truth in it, but maybe the reaction that people are having away from the church, and they're not denying God per se, but they're walking away from the church. Why? I think sometimes it has a lot to do with the pressure that parents have placed on their children as they are growing up, and a church is part of that package. Parents often have, Korean parents especially, in my background as far as I've seen, are notorious for making idols of their children. And the children can't bear that weight, so eventually something breaks and they walk away. They walk away. You've heard the story of a terrible, terrible kid who grew up with all this pressure to become a doctor from mom and dad. And finally, he goes through med school, he becomes a doctor, gets the license, and throws it at mom and dad and says, I'm going to go out and live my life now. This was for you. I'm going to do this other thing for me now. Why? Why did that happen? Because all the identity, all the security, all the future of mom and dad was bottled up in that child. That's not good. And the child could not bear that weight. Some of those kinds of elements, it's kind of heavy. I didn't expect it to be this heavy with you right now, but you know what I'm talking about. You know some of this is true. All of these are temptations for all of us, and many of us have tasted this right on. So, yeah, Leah had some of these things going on. Okay? Let's look at some more examples of idolatry in our lives. This Wednesday, we had a great time. Wednesday, we had a great time with the people that came out. And we did a little project